This passage here on the screen, this involved questions 58, 59, 60 and 61. The passage was all about Daniel C. Dennett and his book called Freedom Evolves, in which this particular passage, the author talks about how Daniel C. Dennett's book, Freedom Evolves, which has his ideas on freedom and free will, is very much influenced by Daniel C. Dennett being a determinist, a naturalist, and a materialist. So that is how we had the passage. Now let's move on to this particular question from the passage, which said, given below are four statements, of which only one can be adequately inferred from the passage. Which one is it? Now, the answer to this question is option D. Now, how do we come up to option D? It's right there in the passage, in a particular part where the passage reads or talks about causa sui. Now, what is causa sui? It's the cause of oneself, or if something comes up from itself, that is what is the Latin phrase causa sui. Now, talking about Dennett's book, the author mentions that this belief in radical freedom. Let me take you to that part in the paragraph, in the passage. It's over here. It says this. I could mark this part for you. It says this belief in radical freedom in ultimate responsibility cannot actually make radical freedom exist. So he says that radical freedom does not exist. And then he says to be absolutely responsible for what one does, one would have to be causa sui, which means that one would have to be the cause of oneself, and this is eventually impossible. And that's how we come up to this particular option in the question. Let me take you back to that option. It says the author of the passage believes the proposition that practically complete and radical freedom is an impossibility. Yes, the author believes that. He says that about Dennett's book, and that is the author's view about complete and radical freedom being an impossibility. How do we eliminate the other options? Option A says the author of Freedom Evolves considers determinism and fatalism to mean the same thing. No. In the last paragraph over here, he says that there's an important point here, the point that fatalism is false. He says that fatalism is false even if determinism is true. So no, he has two different viewpoints about fatalism and determinism. They are not the same thing, and so we can't infer that from the passage. Now B says the author of the passage believes that being moral is determined by birth rather than being a process of acculturation. No, again in paragraph number 10, I should say, he has something very different to say. Let me take you to that part of the paragraph. He says over here, right here in paragraph 10, it says, this then is the sense in which freedom and moral responsibility have evolved. They have evolved by cultural evolution. This is the main part here. Cultural evolution on top of biological evolution. That's what this thing says. Now, that is why we can eliminate option C, which says that the author of the, B, which says that the author of the passage believes that being moral is determined by birth rather than being a process of acculturation. No, he says that it has come up, or morality has come up with the process of acculturation evolving over the process of biological one. So he does believe in acculturation too. C again says the author of the passage believes that compatibilitous freedom is at best an unstable compromise between determinism and free will. No, this is a judgmental statement. This cannot be inferred from the paragraph, and that's how we come up with answer D, or option D, as the answer for this first question in the passage. This question here wanted to know what is the appropriate title for the passage. Now, the answer to this question is again option D, which is Freedom Evolves, Evolution Explains It All. Why is evolution the key word here? Because throughout the passage, if you have read the passage, you must have come across the term evolution explained in a way which connects to both determinism and free will. See, in the passage, what Dennett is trying to explain in through his book, which is Freedom Evolves, is the fact that there is a philosophical paradox. Why is there a paradox? A paradox between what? Between determinism and free will existing together, since they are contradictory theories. Now, they do exist, and we know that's something that cannot exist, two things that cannot exist at the same time but still do. This situation is known as a paradox. So there is a paradox of the coexistence of determinism and free will. This can be explained, as Dennett says, through the use of evolution. He explains, as you may have seen in the passage, that even in the very beginning of the passage, right over here, he says that Daniel C. Dennett is advancing on free will, and in Freedom Evolves, he wants to show how evolution can get us all the way from senseless atoms to freely chosen actions. So he uses the theory of evolution to explain further in the passage how both determinism and free will can be explained together. Even here, see, it says in this part of the paragraph, I can show you here. See, it says free will is entirely compatible, he says, with materialism, naturalism, determinism, and further on the theory of evolution. That's how. And the most important line is right up above here. He says, and he thinks, that is Dennett thinks, that everything about us can be explained within the framework of the theory of evolution. This is one of the most important parts here in the paragraph, which explains to us how we can come up to with option D, which is the title for the passage should be Freedom Evolves, Evolution Explains It All. Why can't it be C, where he talks about determinism? Because determination is one key word which has been, let's say, repeated again and again in the passage. The passage is not just only about determinism, so that is how determinism cannot feature in the title itself. And the other part being that determinism has this one aspect has been linked with evolution, with free will, the other important aspects also. So evolution explains it all about determinism and free will. This is what our title has to be, and that's why the answer for this question is option D. The question here reads, according to the author, one problem with Dennett's book is that, so we have to identify which one of these options very well explains the one problem that the author comes up with about Dennett's book. Now, if I were to take you to this part in the paragraph, which is the last in the passage, which is the last paragraph itself, I can mark for you the lines which give us the answer or lead us to the answer. He says that, but the book, or this is what the one problem he says that, but the book is cluttered, overlong, and too condensed, or sorry, I'm sorry, too concerned with theatricals. So this is one key word we have, that there are a lot of theatricals here in the book, right? Then he says that Dennett claims dramatically, the author says, that determinism does not imply inevitability, and then so on and so forth. So anyway, these are the two key words that we need here. We have dramatically and we have theatricals, and we have the problem that the book is over long and too concerned with theatricals. Anyway, so let's get back to the question here. And according to the author, what is the one problem? We've seen that the problem is, what he's saying is that the book is too grandiloquent, or that the book assumes a grandiloquent manner. What does the word grandiloquent mean? I'm sure you know that it means too grand, or something which is not simplistic, something which has a lot of theatricals, and that is how we come up with this particular option, that the book assumes a grandiloquent manner of explaining the difference between determinism and fatalism. If I take you back to that part in the passage, the last paragraph, it says that towards the end, but it's best stated that fatalism is false and even that determinism is true could have been best stated in a couple of paragraphs, not buried in 40 pages of unnecessary complication. So the book Freedom Evolves, that is the one bad thing about it, that it could have been explained in a couple of paragraphs, but instead Dennett chose to bury it in 40 pages of unnecessary complication. And that, according to the author, is the one bad thing about the book, making option C the correct answer choice for this question. This was a tone question linked to the passage about Dennett, or the book about which Dennett wrote, which was called Freedom Evolves. Now, the question says the tone of the passage can be best described as which of these following, which is you have the options introspective, you have objective, appreciative, and poignant. Now, let's try and eliminate from the options. We know that it cannot be poignant, since the word poignant means when you are when something is either very moving or very emotional, but we know that through a reading of the passage that it was neither, so we can safely eliminate option D. Appreciative, no, since the author does not only go into absolute appreciation of Daniel C. Dennett's book Freedom Evolves. He also, as I will show you shortly, I will mark for you in through the passage that he does go into showing us the negatives of the book. There was the last question again, which also mentioned, or the question one before also mentioned the one fault in the book that the author brings out, and so it's there. There are faults. It's not totally appreciative. The answer is here objective. We'll come back to this, but then how is it not introspective? Is because introspection means thinking deep or meditating, and there is no such meditative thought that has been brought up by the author. Now, how is it objective? How is the tone objective? Throughout the passage, we know that when there is an objective tone, what an author will do is that he will present both the plus points and the minuses, or let's say both the pros and cons, or both the highs and lows of a particular subject, and that is exactly what the author does in this passage also. Over here, if I might bring you back to the passage, right from the beginning, he presents both the highs and lows of the book without any bias. For instance, here in the first paragraph, he says that Daniel C. Dennett succeeds in his aim given what he means by freedom. So he says that he has succeeded in his aim of establishing his points in the book. Also, he says that people might think that what he has said is a strange notion of freedom, but no, he defends Dennett and says that Dennett is part of an old tradition that stretches from a lot of ancient people and on a lot of ancient philosophers. But then he also mentions a lot of minuses. For instance, he says about the book here that all of his rhetoric, he says Daniel's rhetoric is all wrong. Also, towards the end of the paragraph, he says that the book could have been best stated, or the point about fatalism and determinism could have been best stated in a couple of paragraphs. Instead, the book is cluttered, he says over here, cluttered, and he says that the book is overlong and too concerned with theatricals. So that's how we know plus and minuses both. It's just an objective viewpoint of the book Freedom Evolves by Daniel C. Dennett, and that's how we come up with the option B, which is objective, that the tone of the whole passage is objective.